Earlier this season, Enzo Maresca's Chelsea team looked good enough to push for a title challenge, but now, with just a few games to go, it's still possible that they won't even finish in the Champions League places. So today, I'm joined by Jon Mackenzie, Dunca Alexander, and Twomey to ask the question, what's happened? And should Chelsea stick with Enzo Maresca? OK, Duncan, what's happened to Chelsea over the course of the season, and does it show up in the numbers?
Well, fortunately, it does show up in the numbers, which paint a fascinating picture. I've pulled together 4 charts, which should kind of enlighten people as to what exactly has happened at Chelsea. I mean, we've drawn back a bit, so here's the last 4 seasons looking at direct attacks, which is attacks that basically start in a team's own half and get to the opposition final third in a short amount of time. And you can see there that we look at the end of last season and Pochettino did ramp it up in terms of chaos quite a bit. And Maresca sort of carried on, as new managers tend to do. They do tend to sort of just pick up where the old manager left off a lot of times. You can see there that first half of the season, Chelsea operating at a high direct attack amount, but then, you know, a really steep drop around Christmas time, and it's continued to go down. And we can see that mirrored in counter-attacks. Again, we see Pochettino end of last season, them increase quite a lot. Chaos, fun, fans happy, coaches less so probably. Maresca started off similarly, and then again, another decline as the season has gone on, particularly in the second half of the season. This one I think is particularly interesting, it's possession. So possessions are just sequences of passes. So obviously, the more of those you have in a game, sort of a proxy for how chaotic the game is, you know, back and forth. We can see here that under Maresca, they've just steadily declined throughout the season. And that really does sort of point to a team that are keeping the ball more, being more safe, being more defensive, being more cautious. So that kind of mirrors all the complaints that Chelsea fans have been raising. And then the last chart, our old friend, the rolling XG, for and against, we know here that blue is good. And I mean, if you step back really and look at Chelsea over the last few seasons, that's a pretty good chart. A lot of blue.
There's a lot of blue there.
A lot of blue. What are they moaning about? Blue is the colour, etc., etc. But I mean, you can see that Graham Potter had a spell where it really wasn't working very well. I think we can all remember that wasn't the most fun time if you're a Chelsea fan. But Maresca's, you know, quite a lot of blue. But you can see there that the defence started out okay, but then about halfway through the season, it really starts to sort of decline. You can see that this line here at the end, if you can kind of chart Chelsea fans' agitation, then I'd probably put it in that line, because yes, the defence has improved, but yeah, the excitement has dropped to pretty low levels, and especially when you compare it back to previous seasons. So yes, Chelsea have become more defensive, less fun, and we're seeing that in the fans' attitudes.
Well, let me pick up on that point and ask you, Liam, about Chelsea fans' agitation. To what extent are they agitated? Are they finding it difficult to watch this? And did they notice without the numbers, like the change post-Christmas?
Those numbers definitely reflect the eye test, I think, for many supporters. And yes, they are agitated, very much so. At half-time against Fulham, as Maresca was walking across the pitch back to the dressing room, they were chanting a word beginning with W at him that wasn't winner.
Oh.
So that gives you an insight into how the away fans feel, and they tend to be a kind of barometer for the hardcore of the fan base. So it is quite toxic at the moment. It feels like it's maybe one more result away from open mutiny towards Maresca. That doesn't seem too strong to say. And it has its roots in a lot of what we were looking at in those charts.
Yeah.
I think Chelsea fans have seen that the game has slowed down. This was foreshadowed by what Maresca was actually talking about in the first half of the season, where he's saying we don't want to get involved in basketball games. Even when Chelsea were winning, he didn't seem happy in press conferences. And there were several examples during games of when attackers would pass up the opportunity to lead a counter-attack and pass backwards. The stadium would groan and he would ostentatiously applaud on the edge of his technical area. That kind of sums up the cultural clash, I think, that there's been between Maresca and a lot of the fan base, and it's really risen in temperature as the results have dipped and as the production of Chelsea's attack has fallen.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point, isn't it? Because Duncan's mentioned it already. Playing slower, John, doesn't have to be a bad thing. There's nothing wrong in theory with what Maresca's trying to do. In Chelsea's case, the results aren't as good as they were in the first half of the season. But how do you judge the numbers you're looking at and what the fans think?
Yeah, I think the rolling XG chart actually paints quite an interesting picture because, as Duncan mentions, you can see there is a point at which the expected goals go up, the expected goals created. Generating more and better chances is a good thing as a team. However, you can see that comes at the expense of being more open from a defensive point of view. So yes, certainly the attacking performances seem to have dropped off, but that has come with an improvement of the defensive side of things as well. And that, I think, is where we need to start, because I think the question has to be, surely Maresca knows this. Surely he knows that what's happening now has come at the expense of attack. So the question is, why has he wanted to slow the game down? And the reason that is the case is because the old Juan Malillo quote about the faster you play the ball forward, the faster it comes back. What he's basically saying there is that if you accelerate your attacks, then generally you disconnect all of your players, and that means if you lose the ball, then it's harder for you to win it back. So let's imagine that Chalobah just plays a crossfield ball to Neto here really quickly. The rest of his team can't catch up with him. The opposition have defenders around him. If he loses the ball here, it's going to be hard for Chelsea to actually defend. Actually, we know that Chelsea, when they possess the ball, they like to invert one of their fullbacks, bring him inside. And part of the reason for that is because it generates more coverage in the middle to make it easier to counter-press in the central spaces. So even just playing forward quickly means that you don't even have time to make this movement. So again, your structure is not being able to catch up to the attacking part of the game.
I know he feels this way strongly, Duncan, because we play FC 25 together, and every time I try and make a crossfield pass, he shouts at me. It's terrifying. But sorry, John.
When we do that, what always ends up happening, right, is we end up with an isolated player.
Yes, we lose the ball, I know. You've explained it a million times.
But there's something in football that a switch of play, like even if two players do it in the warm-up, people just enjoy that. Maybe more than the game.
Do you want to play with me later?
Yeah, definitely.
It's more fun.
You get this visceral ripple of applause, don't you, whenever the ball goes from one side of the pitch to the other. They just applaud the idea.
It feels good.
Well, it looks good as well, right? Because you play the ball across to someone in acres of space usually, but by the time they get it under control, they're usually, But the big issue here is that the quicker you play, the less you are able to defend well, and you end up with we said basketball games where the chaos can actually go against you as much as it can go for you. However, this has come at the cost of the attacking numbers, which I think is worrying. And so what I did is I thought, let's dig into the numbers.
You dug into Duncan's numbers?
I did. I'm sorry, Duncan. Hope that's okay.
That's fine.
But what I wanted to find out was what impact playing more slowly it had on the way that Chelsea are attacking and generating chances. So what I've got here is, it looks like a lot of data, but hopefully it will become clear as we go. But what I've basically been able to do is divide the game into different phases. So we've got build-up, which is building up from the back. Progression, which is essentially moving the ball through the lines to try and get the ball forward. Counter-attack, which is winning the ball back and then generally attacking quite quickly against an unsettled defence. And then this final one is quite important, is creation. That's basically possessing the ball in the final third, generally trying to break down settled defences. So what I've done is I've divided the season into two halves. So we've got the first half of the season, the first 19 games, and then the subsequent 14 games after that, to just try and have a look at what impact playing slower has had on them. And you might think that playing slower would mean that you'd spend more time in build-up, maybe a bit more time in progression, reduce your time in counter-attacks. But actually, if we look first half versus second half of the season, those numbers are very similar. So about 54% of time spent in build-up in the first half, which is exactly the same in the second half. Slight reductions in progression and counter-attack as well. But the big area here is this creation area here. So you can see they jumped up from 9.7% of time in possession spent in creation, so breaking down settled defences in the final third. That's jumped up to 12% now in the second half, which makes a degree of sense, right? They're building up a little bit more slowly, so teams have time to settle into their block, so they're able to move the ball into that final third, and then they have to try and break it down.
That's presumably what Maresca would want.
Yeah, exactly, because the majority of your expected goal creation is going to come in that kind of phase. You're much more likely to generate expected goals when you have the ball in the final third than if you're trying to build up from the back. Yeah. But the worrying thing is that when you start looking at what impact playing slower has had on their ability to create chances and generate expected goals, a really stark picture emerges, because again, we've got first half and the second half of the season here, top and bottom. We can see in the first half of the season, Chelsea were a top 5 team in terms of efficiency at generating chances in every phase of play. And in the second half of the season, they're not top 5 in any of those metrics, so they've dropped out of those. So by playing more slowly, despite the fact that they're still essentially playing in the same phases about the same amount of time with the uptick in the creation phase, they're now much less good at generating chances from that.
In theory, they should be creating more, but they're actually creating far less.
Yes, and the worrying thing I would say is that in this creation phase, they're now spending much more time in that phase, but they are creating less in it. And I think I've got this is all lots of numbers, so I've tried to boil it all down to the bare bones, just to give you a real sense of what's happening here. So this is just first half and second half of the season, the data in terms of the expected goals. Now the first half of the season is 19 games, second half is 14 games, so I've worked it out on a per 90 basis to give us a better comparison. We can see in the first half of the season they were generating 2 expected goals a game on average, which is
really good.
Yeah, really good. They were the second best team for expected goal generation in the first half of the season. That's dropped down now to about 1.6, so you're reducing it by almost 25%. So there's been a big drop off. But then in every different area that we're talking about, in all those phases of play, we can see that there's been a reduction. So in build-up, they were generating around 0.18 expected goals per game through that phase of play. That's dropped down to 0.06. Progression, that's halved. Counter-attacks, still quite high, but again, it's reduced. And then the really worrying thing here, as we said, creation, that final third, they were generating around 0.67 in the first half of the season. That's dropped down to 0.59.
Despite spending a lot more time in that
area. Right. And again, I think what's really interesting here is you can see why you might want to spend more time in that creation phase, right? Because the majority of your expected goals are coming through your final third creation in open play. So you can understand why Maresca might want to be doing that. But the issue is that they are now doing that and they're generating less than they were in the first half of the season in those kind of phases. And they're creating less in the other phases as well. So they've not only made themselves less dangerous in sort of build-up, progression and counter-attacks, which sort of makes a degree of sense that they might be able to do that if they're playing a bit quicker. But the areas where you're really benefiting from playing slowly, you're not getting the benefit either. And the big question is, I guess, why and what role Maresca has in sort of fixing this.
Well, I mean, Liam, on that note, do you think this is an issue with the players not being suited to the style of play, or are they just not playing well? Like, what do you think it is?
I think it's a bit of both. You can certainly make an argument that, and plenty of Chelsea supporters have made this argument, that the more that Chelsea have shifted to Maresca ball, or what Maresca would define as Maresca ball, this slower, more possession-focused style, the worse they've become, and the worse their individual players have become. Everyone raises the example of Cole Palmer and how his production has declined. We'll get into that in more detail. But all of Chelsea's individual attackers have declined. So I think there has been an element of players not playing well, but there are significant causes for concern, as Jon highlighted, about whether the players are actually best suited to this style of football. I think a lot of them really enjoyed the freedom that they got in an attacking sense under Pochettino, and Cole Palmer in particular really thrived in those moments. But equally defensively under Pochettino, it was their worst defensive record of the Premier League era. So there are always two sides to this, which we'll discuss.
And we should remember that football seasons aren't sort of hermetically sealed. Teams do adapt during seasons. They have to, because the opposition change, and teams have to work out what to do. But I think the worry for Chelsea fans is that we kind of saw this with Maresca at Leicester last season, where they started very well and they were miles clear in the Championship and then only really scraped across the line. And the complaint from the Leicester fans was, hauntingly similar to the complaints Chelsea fans have got at the moment. It can work. Leicester in 2015-16 essentially changed their style of play halfway through, and that won them the title. But I think, as Liam was saying, the issue here is that the evidence that we're seeing from this change that Maresca's made isn't very good. And it's like, at what point does he have to sort of acknowledge that? And at the moment, we don't seem to be at that point.
There's one point to make, which I think Maresca himself has raised, which is a lot of Chelsea's more recent opponents in the second half of the season. Part of the reason they have such a difficult run-in is they've played a lot of the bottom half of the table, who you would maybe expect to especially come to Stamford Bridge and sit in a low block and challenge Chelsea to break that down.
And that's where they're struggling.
Yeah, but there is also a pretty damning statistic that a lot of Chelsea fans who are critical of Maresca point to, which is that he hasn't beaten a single Premier League coach twice, or the second time that he's faced them, which kind of feeds into this narrative that's become quite popular, whether it's true or not, that Chelsea, once you play them once, they're so choreographed in their build-up that it's easier to prepare for them and maybe neutralise what they're trying to do.
I mean, on this note, at the end of last season, at the beginning of this season, Cole Palmer, people were calling him the best player in the world, or potentially the best player in the Premier League, Jon. I feel like he's dropped off a little bit. I mean, has this impacted him specifically?
Yeah, and I think that's the really important question to be asking, because if you're going to change your attacking style of play and it comes at the expense of one of your best attackers, then there's real questions to be raised there. Cole Palmer is the top scorer for Chelsea this season. He scored 12 goals in the first half of the season. In the second half of the season, he's only scored 2, which suggests that there's a correlation between their changing play style in attack and what he can do. So what I thought I would do is just go through and look at some of his goals to see the sort of situations that they're emerging from. So 2 goals he scored in the second half of the season. These are the 2 goals. So one against Palace here that you can see, and then one against Bournemouth. Now, guys, what do you notice about both of these goals? What situation would you say that Cole Palmer is in both of these screenshots?
The games were played on a different day, Jon.
They were played on a different day against different teams, yeah.
Be more specific about your question. What do you want from me?
Well, what I want you to point out to me
Yep.
is the sort of scenario that the opponent's defensive.
Oh, he's running
team.
in behind.
Running in behind here, yeah, and in this instance, neither of these games are played against settled defence, right?
Right.
You can see the defenders running back towards their own goals in both situations.
Chaos, you could say.
Yeah, chaos. And he's also got like plenty of space and time here to get his shots away.
Is this a game, Jon?
In the absence of JJ, I've made a game, and what I've done is I've ordered all of his goals by how much they are against a settled defence.
Okay.
And what I want you guys to do is tell me the point at which you think his goal has come against a settled defence.
Okay.
Can we just shout chaos? If it's
You can shout chaos.
Or settled.
Or settled.
Okay,
yeah.
chaos or settled, right?
Chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is actually Nkunku on the ball here, but it ends up with a scenario where Cole Palmer taps in from a few yards out. Chaos, it's against Southampton.
chaos.
I'm going to
Chaos.
say chaos, Jon.
I mean, look where the goalkeeper is. That is
Yeah.
Chaotic as it gets.
Chaos.
Oh, that's chaos as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Chaos.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is actually a turnover of the ball that resulted in a counter-attack.
Chaos.
Chaos again. Yep.
It's chaos.
classic chaos.
This is chaos, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
that
I think
chaos?
Yeah, that's not. A
I'd say it's
settled
mild chaos.
defence.
Mild chaos?
Yeah.
They
dangerous.
won the ball high up the pitch, so
Yeah, that's
weren't
where it
ready
was a
for it.
turnover, wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh.
Now it's getting tricky.
Duncan.
Yeah, I'd say that's semi-settled.
Semi-settled?
Settled chaos.
Yeah, again, in this situation, he's generated the chaos by dribbling a few players,
Right.
and as a result, the block was a bit more consistent, and now it's become more chaotic. But
Okay.
it's generated a chance for him.
That's settled.
Yeah, this is, I think, the only chance that I found that is sort of against a settled defence. It's a second phase of a free kick. They play the ball out wide and it comes back in. There's a lot of bodies in the middle that they can defend outwards towards him, and he absolutely pearls it into the top corner here. There's no examples of him really generating goals against many chances against settled defences. He likes to shoot from these kind of areas, and he's quite good at it, but there's a lot of shots from those sorts of areas
Sure.
that don't go in.
He's a fraud, Jon, that's what you're saying.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. Obviously, what I'm saying is that
He likes to score easier goals.
He likes to. He is incredibly dangerous in chaotic moments. That's where you're getting your most out of him. If you're then going to put him into a scenario where you're trying to reduce chaos, he's going to reduce his output. And so the big question is whether or not Chelsea playing slower then has had a negative impact on Cole Palmer. But I think you can extend that to the rest of the team as well, because I actually watched all of the chances that their central players have in these kind of scenarios. Nicholas Jackson, another player who thrives on running in behind. He has scored a few in goals of balls coming into fairly packed boxes. But the majority of the chances that he gets are in behind, running through. Same with Enzo Fernandez. I think he is a pretty good player at box crashing, getting into these goal-scoring situations. You'll remember a few headers, a few volleys. There was one against Spurs, I think, where he runs into the box and gets a goal. But he's only scored 4 goals this season, I think, in the Premier League, and so you can't rely on him to be generating chances as well. So the big question then is, if your central players aren't particularly dangerous against settled defences in lower blocks in the final third, how good are your wide players at generating chances, or generated chances for their teammates in those kind of situations? And I think this is an interesting situation as well from the point of view of slowing the game down, right? Because Chelsea play with 2 wingers who generally are going to pin the opposition defence to try and create space. But as we've already said, in their build-up phase, they're inverting one of their fullbacks narrow in order to give you more defensive cover in the middle. So that automatically is going to affect how you're going to access width. We've got Cucurella here, who's sometimes used as a bit more of a width provider, but that means the player on the right, because the fullback is inverted, has to rely on basically Palmer coming across to help out as well. So what you're doing then is you're isolating your two wingers a little bit, and then the big question is, against a low block, how well are they going to be able to take it around their opposition fullback to generate those chances? And I think what I've seen in the second half of the season, Liam can maybe confirm or deny this, but I think that both Pedro Neto and Noni Madueke has been a little bit injured in the second half of the season as well. I think both of these players are much more dangerous from the right-hand side, which means that, the majority of chances then are coming down this side of the field. On the other side of the field, weirdly enough, Cucurella is probably the most dangerous attacking player.
Back post menace.
Yeah, right. How many chances have you seen in the last few weeks where it's been either Madueke or Neto coming into the byline, playing that cutback from the edge, and Cucurella box crashing? The issue then is that you're relying on your right-hand side for creativity, and you're not that threatening through the centre or down the opposite side. You're reducing the threat that you're able to have in these sorts of games. But is that something that you've seen from watching?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you see Neto on the left, he doesn't appear to really know what to do, because his instinct is obviously to try and knock the ball ahead of his left foot. But that's kind of the most predictable thing that a right back is expecting. So he struggles to create separation on that side quite often. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, even when he's on the right, I think Madueke has probably been the most effective against those low blocks at just knocking the ball past his defender, getting to the byline first, and being able to put in a low cross or a cutback. He can be relied upon to be consistently aggressive, even if he's not consistently effective.
Yeah, and I think this shows up again in some of the numbers. So what I've done here is I've bucketed the shots locations that Chelsea had in the first half of the season on the left here, and then in the second half of the season on the right. And as we can see, the area that most of the chances are being created from when they're playing quicker in the first half of the season is from the right. It's Cole Palmer, Noni Madueke getting in behind and generating chances from there. Whereas in the second half of the season, when things slow down, they are creating fewer chances in this area of the pitch as direct shots. And I think that's because, again, they're having to rely on the right-hand side players to actually get the ball. So there's lots of crosses going into the back post, for example. And as a result, the way that they're attacking in the first half is just very different from the way that they're attacking in the second half in terms of the sorts of areas where they're generating shots from as well. So again, I think all of this comes down to this question of, if the players are not suited to breaking down low blocks, which appears to be the case, you're left with two options. One option is you stick with Maresca and you say, we're going to fix this somehow. Probably is going to involve spending a lot more money in the transfer market to bring in sort of slower technical players who are able to break down low blocks. Maybe a striker who's a good box presence if you're going to end up playing a lot of crosses. Or you say, well, the squad that we've built, we spent a lot of money on, the players are suited to a different style of play. Maybe the solution here then is we look for a manager who's going to be able to, actually celebrate the aspects of the squad that are good right now. Yeah. That squad seems to play well at speed. The issue is when they play at speed, they're left open defensively. Can you find a manager who maybe brings those two things together, offers a bit of control and allows for a bit of chaos as well?
Well, let's come on to talk about that shortly. I want to pick up on the point that you made there, though, about the potential of Chelsea spending more money to get the correct players to play this style of play. I was of the opinion that they'd already spent rather a lot of money and maybe didn't have much going around. But The Athletic's new football finance writer, Chris Weatherspoon, has written a very interesting piece about this recently, but is here to tell us that Chelsea, in fact, do have money to spend this season, and quite a lot of it, Chris.
At the operating level, before any player sales, Chelsea Football Club have lost £1.291 billion in the last decade. That's £354,000 a day, every day, for the last 10 years. But they keep signing players and they keep spending money. From a cash perspective, Chelsea don't have any problems. They've long had owners who are willing to fund the club in whatever activity it wants to undertake. In the last couple of years, under new ownership, they've received nearly £800 million in owner funding, and there's no sign of that pot drying up anytime soon. From a PSR perspective, Chelsea sold their women's team effectively to themselves for £200 million last year on the back of selling hotels and a car park the year before. In all, we estimate that Chelsea could lose £300 million this season and still not breach PSR. They won't, but they probably will make a big loss, and more player signings in the future point to no profitability anytime soon.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Liam, let's pick up with you then. Have you heard anything from inside the club about what their plans for Maresca's future? Because I think it's clear from the episode so far, it's a reasonable argument to make from the fans that maybe there should be some consideration here, but what are the club going to do about it?
Absolutely everything we're told is that the club are fully committed to Maresca. You know, they gave him a 5-year contract with an option for a 6th year. This is the direction that they wanted to go in, particularly after Mauricio Pochettino, who was always kind of seen as a bit of a half measure. He was given a 2-year deal with an option for a 3rd. There was always going to be a decision point last summer. They wanted an emerging coach to play this particular style of football. And so everything we've been told suggests that they want Maresca to take this group forward. There's also the fact that this is kind of viewed at Chelsea as almost a double season, given the Club World Cup.
Right.
This is not the summer where you would want to be doing a coaching search.
And what about if they don't finish in the Champions League places, don't qualify for next season?
That, to some degree, is unknowable. I mean, everything we've been told suggests that they wouldn't want to get rid of Maresca, even in that scenario. But results have a habit of changing the tenor of things, don't they? If Chelsea finish the season very limply and perhaps even finish in a lower position than they did under Pochettino, who knows? But we know that all things being equal, they do not want to change coach anytime soon, and they want to give Maresca enough time to actually properly implement this style.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Duncan, imagine, I'm going to talk to you like you're ChatGPT now. Here's my brief for you. Right. Imagine that you're Chelsea's director of football, and your task is to decide whether or not to replace Maresca. Presumably, part of your job before making that decision would be to look beyond Maresca and see who is available out there, what other teams are playing similar styles or styles that might suit the sort of players that Chelsea already have. Do you think there's many coaches, like either currently available or ideally available, that could come in and do the job that Jon's describing?
Well, you're right that we've gone beyond the point of clubs just putting adverts in the back of a newspaper for a new manager. So they have advanced to some extent. I mean, to Liam's point, I think the dream of clubs behind the scenes is to build long-term platforms where head coaches come in and play the club style. But you know, football has an unfortunate habit of having supporters at games who voice their opinions when they don't like it, and I think that may be what we're experiencing right now at Chelsea. But yeah, I mean, pull some numbers together here. This is based on our play style metrics, looking at the sort of 5 most similar teams across the top 5 European leagues to Chelsea this season. Now, I think it's quite interesting because we've got 3 teams here, Liverpool, Barcelona, Marseille. We've got new managers, a bit like Chelsea have. And then 2 clubs, Dortmund, Milan, where they've had managerial turmoil already this season. They've already decided that it wasn't going that well for them. I think, and again, sort of philosophically, if we lean into a little bit there, I think if you look at Liverpool, you know, Arne Slot's come in, he's tweaked the Klopp system a bit. They're not quite as chaotic, to our point earlier, as they were under Klopp, and it's worked. They're about to win the league. Now, if Liverpool were 5th now, or 6th, or even where Chelsea are, then I'm pretty sure we'd be having similar conversations of, oh, you know, Slot kind of, he doesn't get it, it's not worked. And we forget just how much results do impact this thing. And you know, look at Barcelona, they're kind of having the other experience really, where they have looked incredibly open at points. I'm sure Maresca's watched some of Barcelona's games and almost wept at their high line and how many chances they give up. Yet, to Jon's points earlier, they're so fast on the break and they are creating those opportunities, and they've got a front 3 that possibly are more dynamic than Chelsea. So I don't think there's a lot of candidates out there. I mean, the interesting team here really is Marseille, because, you know, Roberto De Zerbi was in the Premier League. We kind of know what he can do. He is Maresca-esque, I'd say, but with a lot more pragmatism. We saw at Brighton that he was willing to sort of, you know, mix things up where necessary. And I think that is kind of the issue with Maresca, is that he's so dogmatic, and he kind of just seems to lean more into that dogmatism as the season goes on. And I think The big question is, for Chelsea, if they get to this point, is can we find someone that does fit into this philosophy that we want to pursue, but is also a bit adaptive, because football does have a habit of changing quite quickly.
The really interesting thing for me here is that this play style for Chelsea has been garnered across the course of the whole season, where they started off playing more chaotic football and they've ended up playing less chaotic football, and as a result they've started being matched to these teams where they're trying to balance off chaos and control. So we've got Liverpool, we talked about, where yes, they want to still lean into the Jurgen Klopp style, but Arne Slot is on record saying we don't want to be chaotic in every moment, which is what happened under Klopp. What we're going to do is pick and choose our moments where we're going to then accelerate the tempo and speed and generate these really exciting attacks when we feel as though there's a payoff there. We're not going to necessarily lose the ball and then have to defend. Same is true with Barcelona. Barcelona under Hansi Flick, playing this really exciting brand of football where they are able to do some of the more controlled elements. Obviously it helps when you have the squad that Barcelona have, but what Hansi Flick is great at is, again, helping his team to understand the moments when it's worthwhile going into the chaotic, accelerated attacking phases, and when it's worthwhile just holding back and making sure that you don't. Reading the situation and being able to have, a qualitative way of determining now we go, now we stay. Roberto De Zerbi, like a great example as well of a coach who has found a way of being able to play possession football that introduces these artificial transition moments, right? So the whole concept of an artificial transition is that you're trying to get transitional qualities out of the game, so the chaos, but without necessarily having to rely on the chaos, right? You're generating it with the ball, so there's a little less risk there as well. So I think it's really interesting that these three teams have shown up, because I think it raises the question, well, should Chelsea then say, okay, we wanted to do like control ball. We've seen that Guardiola has had a huge amount of success with it. It's actually really hard to do, and you have to have the right players, you have to spend a lot of money, you have to have a lot of turnover, and you have to have a brilliant coach to do that. Why not say, okay, fine, that is maybe less of a realistic expectation. Why not try and do what a lot of the other teams in Europe are doing right now, which is getting the balance between control and chaos, so that you can get the most out of players like Cole Palmer and Noni Madueke, so you can have those accelerated tempo moments where it's like, now we go, but you balance it off with a concept of control as well, be it like low build-up with someone like Marseille, or a little bit more patient build-up with a team like Barcelona. So for me then the question is, what coaches are available? Roberto De Zerbi may be a little bit of a loose cannon, so Chelsea might not want to go with him.
Well, Chelsea actually looked at De Zerbi last summer before hiring Maresca.
Which is interesting, right? Because that's the two different play styles, and maybe they've gone one way rather than the other.
Yeah, and I think, part of the evaluation of De Zerbi was probably some of that character off-field stuff, as well as just his profile as a coach.
Yeah. So there's two up-and-coming coaches, I would say, who would be potential. So not quite in the same mould as Maresca, because I think there's maybe a bit more risk involved with him. But I'm thinking of Francesco Farioli, who is a coach at Ajax at the moment. Ajax are going to win the league after having a few sort of tumultuous years, really, which is surprising for Ajax. But the interesting thing about Farioli is that he was the assistant to Roberto De Zerbi for a little while. He was actually the goalkeeping coach, but I think part of his remit was to do like the build-up stuff as well. His development has actually been maybe more towards the sort of control element. His team is very, very defensively strong, and maybe aren't creating as much of that attacking chaos as perhaps Chelsea fans would like. But that's still the way that they do it. They defend well, but then they create these moments where they can go quick. I think he's definitely one to watch. And then someone like maybe Sebastian Hoeneß in Germany. He's at Stuttgart at the moment. Again, Germany is the sort of the birthplace of this sort of let's try and balance chaos and control off, right? And Hansi Flick, German, it comes from that sort of tradition where you try and introduce chaos and get the upside of chaos and the benefits of chaos, but then have these strong ideas of control as well. So maybe it makes sense to go to Germany, get one of their up-and-coming coaches as well. But I think that's the decision that Chelsea have to have. Do we actually eventually lean into this ultimate control approach, which is what Maresca seems to espouse, or do we maybe go for a halfway house between chaos and control and actually get the benefit for our players?
Hey, speaking of chaos, John, Phil Hayes here to tell us about something chaotic that might be happening in Serie A. What is it, Phil?
If you haven't already, take a quick look at the Serie A table. What you'll find is Inter and Napoli locked at the top of it on 71 points with 5 games to go. Naturally, because it's so tight, you'll look to goal difference and the head-to-head record to see how this might be settled. But don't bother, because if these teams finish level at the top of the table when the season finishes, the Scudetto will be decided on the basis of a special one-off playoff. The rules were changed in 2022 to add an extra layer of excitement to proceedings, and if we get a playoff, it'll be a 90-minute match which goes straight to penalties. It might not happen because there's a long way to go, but I'm absolutely here for it and I'm hoping it does. If you want more stories like this, sign up to the Athletic FC newsletter, clicking on the link below.
Hey, thanks, Phil. Okay, right. So listen, we've heard there are other options. There is a reason to be having this conversation. Liam, can you reflect the fans en masse? Like, what do you think? Do you think they want Maresca to go on the whole in the summer, or are they still tentative about it?
Well, I am renowned for my ability to speak for an entire supporter base.
That's why I've asked you.
But, I mean, we do get the sense through comments on our articles, through the atmosphere in the stadium, through the general vibe online among the Chelsea supporters that a lot of them are done with Maresca at this point.
Would they be less unhappy than they were last season when Pochettino was let go?
It's funny because I think there's already a rose-tinted spectacle aspect to the Pochettino era where a lot of them were complaining about him at the time.
Sure.
And especially some of the farcical goals that Chelsea regularly conceded. We're not seeing anywhere near as much of that now under Maresca, but as there is far less attacking dynamism, that is what people are focusing on. And I think there is a broad appetite from the supporters to see a different coach. But as I've said, I don't get the impression the club are going to go that way. And I'm not even sure that they should, because Chelsea played chaos ball for most of last season and finished 6th. So sooner or later you have to ask the question, how good is the squad, regardless of what style you're playing? Are they good enough to just be a complete no-brainer top 4 team, or do they need a bit more? I know that sounds crazy. Do they need more in terms of transfers as well as from the dugout?
Okay. Well, it's decree time, Duncan. What do you think? Yes or no?
I would say yes. I mean, I think Maresca's slightly unlucky that he's kind of managing Chelsea at a point in time where there's a general sort of Premier League discussion about boring football and, you know, what is excitement and, you know, do fans deserve action? And I think he's kind of tried to instill that opposite system to that at a time when that's happening. I think, to Liam's point, I think it could still end up being a pretty good season for Chelsea, getting the Champions League, doing the first expanded Club World Cup. They could win the Conference League, which they haven't taken a huge amount of interest in thus far, but they might do when they get to the final. So I would probably give him at least next season, half of next season, see how it goes. I mean, as I said earlier, football seasons do fluctuate quite a lot. Who's to say that at the start of next season they don't come out of the traps really well?
That's true, John.
Yeah, it's funny because I watched the Fulham game in the weekend and I sort of went through both halves of the fan base experience at Chelsea, because in the first half I was watching and I was like, yeah, there's issues here. Like the pressing, I thought, was just all over the place. It looks like the players don't know what they're doing. Get rid. And then the second half happened and he fixed all the problems.
Right.
And suddenly they were playing a little bit more, I thought, directly in that game as well. They were able to play with a little bit more speed. And I got to the end of it and I was like, on the basis of that, I probably would keep him. I think that he's fixing these problems. Okay, what's the issue is that if you go into a game without the correct game plan and the wrong players, because what he did is he changed a lot of the players at half time and was able to fix the issues that were there. That seems to me to be bad coaching on the one hand, but on the same argument, like, he then fixed those problems later on as well. So I can understand why the fan base are both ways.
He's clearly a very good coach. Is he a very good person at looking like a good coach is the question. Because I think he comes across sometimes, and you said earlier about how, like, he, you know, ostentatiously applauds when a player does what he instructed them to. Whether that is the element that he needs to improve, whether he needs to maybe just be a little bit more humble and lean into being the manager of Chelsea rather than kind of, I'm a coaching mastermind.
Huh.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.